What if everything you've been told about being born again is completely wrong? What if the very thing you thought would bring you closer to God has actually kept you trapped in a cycle of seeking, striving, and never quite arriving? This might sound radical, even uncomfortable, but stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover could completely transform not just your spiritual life, but your entire experience of reality itself. For years, countless believers have walked the same well-worn path, joining churches, getting baptized, accepting doctrines, following all the right rules. They've done everything they were told would make them born again, and yet something essential remains missing. There's still that nagging emptiness, that sense of separation, that feeling of being a spiritual outsider looking in. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever wondered why, despite all your religious efforts, you still feel disconnected from the very God you're seeking? Here's the truth that Smith Wigglesworth discovered through his profound spiritual journey. Being born again has nothing to do with external rituals or religious membership. It's not about what you join, what you believe, or how perfectly you follow a set of rules. Instead, it's something far more radical and transformative. It's a complete shift in consciousness that changes everything about how you perceive yourself, God, and the world around you. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now think about this for a moment. What if the life you're currently living, with all its struggles, limitations, and constant sense of lack, isn't actually your real life at all? What if it's something more like a dream, or even a nightmare, that you've been hypnotized into believing is reality? Smith Wigglesworth understood that most people exist in what he called a collective trance, a shared delusion that keeps us trapped in a false sense of who we are and what's possible for us. This awakening to being truly born again doesn't require you to believe something new or add another layer of religious knowledge to what you already know. Instead, it requires something much more challenging. You must see through everything you've always believed about yourself. You must die to a fundamental lie that has shaped your entire existence. The lie that you are separate from God, that you are a limited human being desperately trying to reach a distant divine power. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this death isn't physical, and it isn't even particularly dramatic. It's the death of a false identity, the dissolution of an illusion that has kept you small, fearful, and perpetually seeking. And here's what makes this so profound. When you are born again in this true sense, you don't actually gain something you never had. Instead, you lose something you never were, and in that loss, you discover what you've always been. So what happens when this false identity begins to crumble? Here's where the real transformation takes place, and it's not what most people expect. You see, the entire spiritual journey that most of us have been taught is fundamentally backwards. We've been told to pray harder, seek more earnestly, strive to become worthy, to reach up toward a God who seems distant and separate. But the hidden truth that Smith Wigglesworth uncovered completely reverses this entire paradigm. When you truly grasp what being born again means, something extraordinary happens to your prayer life. You stop praying to God as if you're a beggar petitioning a king. Instead, you begin praying from God, recognizing that the very voice within you that seeks truth, that yearns for connection, that reaches toward the divine, that voice is already God expressing through you. Think about the profound impact of this revelation on your daily life. Prayer is no longer about convincing an external power to intervene in your circumstances. It becomes communion, an intimate recognition of the divine presence that has never actually left you, because it is you. This shift in consciousness changes absolutely everything about how you approach life's challenges. Most people spend their entire lives treating symptoms, trying to fix their health, improve their finances, repair their relationships, manage their emotions. They're constantly putting out fires, dealing with one crisis after another, never understanding why the same patterns keep repeating. But when you're born again into this new awareness, you stop chasing symptoms and start addressing the root cause, which is always a mistaken sense of identity. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. I Create content like this regularly. Deep spiritual insights and practical wisdom for your journey. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. The real journey isn't about becoming someone different or achieving some higher spiritual status. It's about returning to the truth of your being, stripping away the layers of false belief that have hidden your true nature from yourself. And here's what's remarkable. When you make this return, when you rest in the awareness of what you actually are rather than what you thought you were, everything begins to align naturally. Not through force, not through manipulation, not through desperate striving, but through a kind of divine effortlessness that flows from being rooted in truth. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because Smith Wigglesworth discovered something that most spiritual teachers miss entirely. He called it dying daily, and it's the secret to sustaining this born-again consciousness in a world that constantly pulls you back into the trance of separation. You see, being born again isn't a one-time event that happens at an altar or during a special moment of conversion. It's a continuous awakening, a moment-by-moment decision to live from your true identity as the presence of God made visible in human form. Every single day you're faced with countless opportunities to either identify with the false self or rest in the truth. Every interaction, every challenge, every decision becomes a choice point. The false self whispers that you're alone, limited, vulnerable, separate. The truth reveals that you are whole, connected, infinite consciousness temporarily expressing through this beautiful human experience. This daily dying isn't about behavior modification or trying harder to be good. It's about changing the consciousness from which all your behavior naturally flows, and that changes everything about what becomes possible in your life. If this resonates with something deep inside you, write in the comments, "I'm ready to awaken." But here's where most people get stuck, and it's a trap that the religious system has actually reinforced for centuries. They think that if they just read more scripture, attend more services, memorize more verses, or follow the rules more perfectly, somehow that will trigger this transformation. And while there's nothing wrong with any of those practices, they're not the doorway to being born again. They're not the catalyst for this profound shift in consciousness. The real revelation comes from somewhere entirely different, and it's both simpler and more challenging than anything you've been taught. This awakening happens in stillness. It emerges when you finally stop trying to make something happen, when you release the exhausting effort of spiritual achievement, and you simply rest in the presence of what already is. Think about that for a moment. The entire journey has been about stopping, not starting, about surrendering, not striving, about recognizing rather than acquiring. In that sacred silence, when all the noise of seeking and striving falls away, something remarkable is revealed. You're not a broken sinner desperately seeking salvation from an external source. You are salvation itself, expressing as your unique, irreplaceable life. That's the hidden truth that changes everything. Let me share a real story that illustrates this transformation in a way that makes it tangible and relatable. There was a woman named Sarah who had been a devoted churchgoer for 20 years. 20 years of showing up faithfully, praying earnestly, serving diligently, following every rule with precision. From the outside, she looked like the model believer. But on the inside, there was this persistent emptiness, this nagging sense that something essential was missing. She kept thinking that maybe if she just tried harder, believed more fervently, or devoted herself more completely, that hollow feeling would finally be filled. When Sarah first encountered Smith Wigglesworth's teachings on being born again, her initial reaction was resistance. This seemed too radical, too simple, maybe even dangerous. It challenged everything she'd built her spiritual life upon. But something in his words kept calling to her, stirring something deep within that she couldn't ignore. So she began to practice what he taught, specifically the practice of simply being still and resting in presence, rather than constantly seeking or striving. One ordinary morning during meditation, nothing particularly dramatic or supernatural, it happened. Sarah wasn't trying to pray or reach God or make anything occur. She was simply sitting in silence, present to what is. And in that moment there was a quiet knowing, a revelation that bypassed her thinking mind entirely. She had never been separate from God, not for a single moment. The one who had been seeking, and the one being sought, were the same. The journey she'd been on for 20 years had been from herself to herself, and the distance had always been an illusion. From that day forward, everything changed for Sarah, though, paradoxically, nothing external had shifted. Her circumstances remained the same. Her challenges didn't magically disappear. Her life still had the same problems it had the day before, but her relationship to all of it transformed completely. She no longer felt like a victim waiting for divine rescue. She felt like consciousness itself, observing and navigating life from a place of profound inner peace and unshakable authority. The impact of this shift rippled through every area of her existence, not because she was trying to change things, but because she was living from a completely different foundation. What Sarah discovered is available to anyone willing to make the same journey from seeking to being, from striving to resting, from believing you're separate to recognizing you never were. This isn't about adding new spiritual practices or accumulating more knowledge. It's about a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own existence and the divine presence that has always been closer to you than your own breath. If Sarah's story resonates with your own journey, type in the comments, "This is my awakening too." Sarah's story is powerful, but let me share another transformation that shows how this awakening works in a completely different context. There was a man named Michael, a highly successful businessman who had everything the world promises will bring fulfillment: substantial wealth, impressive status, recognition in his industry. From every external measure, he had won at life. Yet inside, there was this profound hollowness that no achievement could fill. He'd tried everything the self-help world offers: therapy sessions, motivational seminars, personal development programs, but nothing touched that deep emptiness. When a friend recommended Smith Wigglesworth's writings on spiritual rebirth, Michael was honestly skeptical. He thought spirituality was just another coping mechanism for people who couldn't succeed in the real world. But his desperation opened a door that success had sealed shut. He started reading and practicing the presence, though at first it felt awkward and pointless. He'd sit in silence trying to sense a divine presence he wasn't even sure existed. But something kept him going. Some intuition that there was more to this than his rational mind could grasp. 3 months into this practice, Michael faced a major business crisis, the kind that would have previously sent him into panic mode and sleepless nights of anxiety. But something extraordinary happened. He felt no fear, not because he was suppressing it or using positive thinking to override it, but because he genuinely perceived the situation from an entirely different vantage point. He wasn't a vulnerable individual facing potential disaster. He was consciousness itself, calmly, observing a temporary challenge that would pass like everything else. The crisis eventually resolved in unexpected ways, but the real breakthrough wasn't in the outcome. It was in Michael's fundamental shift of identity. His peace was no longer dependent on business success or failure, because his sense of self wasn't tied to external circumstances anymore. This same principle of consciousness transformation applies to physical healing in ways that challenge everything we think we know about health and the body. Elena's journey demonstrates this beautifully. She had suffered from chronic illness for 7 years, cycling through every medical treatment, alternative therapy, and healing modality she could find. Some things provided temporary relief, but nothing lasted. She felt betrayed by her body and abandoned by any benevolent universe that might exist. When Elena encountered Smith Wigglesworth's teaching that true healing emerges from a change in consciousness, her first reaction was anger. Was this just more blame being placed on sick people? Another way to say it was all in her head. But as she explored deeper, she understood something subtle but crucial. Wigglesworth wasn't denying the reality of physical symptoms or suggesting she refuse treatment. He was pointing to a deeper truth that our experience of the body always reflects our consciousness, and consciousness can be transformed regardless of current conditions. Elena began a radical practice of shifting her identity. Instead of constantly affirming her sickness through the statement, "I am sick," she rested in a different awareness. I am the presence of God expressing as this life. She didn't deny symptoms when they appeared, but she stopped identifying her essential self with them. She recognized herself as wholeness itself, temporarily experiencing a false sense of limitation. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Over 6 months, her symptoms began improving in ways that baffled her. Doctors. But even more remarkable than physical healing was her inner revolution. Whether her body completely healed or not, she had been born again into a consciousness of peace. She was no longer a victim of disease, but awareness itself, transcending all physical conditions. What both Michael and Elena discovered is that being born again isn't about changing your external circumstances first. It's about changing the consciousness from which you experience those circumstances, and that shift creates possibilities that didn't exist before. If you're beginning to see how consciousness shapes your entire reality, write in the comments, "I see it now." These stories reveal something crucial, but they also raise an important question. How do you actually live from this born-again consciousness in the midst of everyday life? How do you sustain this awareness when you're dealing with traffic, difficult people, mounting bills, and all the chaos that regular human existence throws at you? This is where Smith Wigglesworth's practical wisdom becomes absolutely essential, because he didn't just teach theory. He gave specific practices that anchor you in this new reality. The first practice is what he called practicing the presence, and it's deceptively simple yet profoundly transformative. This isn't about trying to get something or achieve some spiritual state. It's about recognizing what already is, right here, right now. Throughout your day, you pause and become aware of the presence of God exactly where you are. Not in some distant heaven, not in a church building, not in a future moment when you've finally become holy enough. Right now, in this exact moment, the fullness of divine presence is here. But here's the shift in mindset that changes everything. This presence isn't some external being watching you from a distance, judging your performance or waiting for you to get it right. It's the very consciousness through which you're experiencing life itself. It's the awareness reading these words, the intelligence thinking these thoughts, the life force breathing this breath. You're not separate from this presence trying to connect with it. You are this presence, temporarily forgetting itself in human experience. The beauty of this practice is that you can start immediately with the simplest of actions. When you wake up tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone or start planning your day, or begin worrying about everything you need to do, take 60 seconds, just 1 minute to consciously recognize the presence of God is here, as me, living this day. That simple pause, repeated consistently, begins to rewire your entire relationship with existence. You start each day rooted in truth, rather than immediately diving into the trance of separation and struggle. This brings us to another profound practice that Wigglesworth emphasized, and it completely revolutionizes what meditation actually is. Most meditation techniques are all about achieving something, whether it's peace, clarity, enlightenment, or healing. You sit down with an agenda, trying to make something happen, striving towards some future state of consciousness. But Wigglesworth taught something radically different. Meditation, without seeking. This is meditation as being rather than becoming. When you practice this way, you sit comfortably and close your eyes, but you're not trying to empty your mind or focus on anything specific or reach some altered state. You simply rest in awareness itself. Just be the awareness that you already are. Thoughts will come, and that's completely natural and fine. You don't fight them, trying to force your mind into silence, but you also don't follow them, getting lost in the storylines and dramas they create. Instead, you notice something remarkable. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear and disappear. You're not the thoughts themselves. You're the eternal witness, the spacious consciousness that remains, untouched by whatever passes through it. This recognition is the doorway to freedom. Your true nature isn't the anxious mind or the worried thoughts or the mental chatter that never stops. Your true nature is the silent, spacious awareness in which all experience occurs. When you rest in this awareness daily, even for just 10 minutes, something profound begins to happen. This consciousness starts to permeate your entire day. You begin living from awareness rather than from the reactive, conditioned mind. You start responding to life from a place of centered presence instead of unconscious patterns. This is what being born again actually looks like in practical, moment-to-moment experience. The impact of these practices isn't flashy or dramatic. It's a quiet revolution that happens behind the scenes of your life, gradually transforming how you relate to everything. If you're ready to start practicing the presence in your own life, write in the comments, "I'm choosing awareness." But there's another dimension to this awakening that might sound controversial at first, yet it's absolutely central to understanding what Smith Wigglesworth meant by being born again. He taught about recognizing the Christ within, and this has nothing to do with religious affiliation or worshiping an external figure. The Christ isn't a person you bow down to or pray to from a distance. It's the divine presence expressing as you, right now. It's your true identity, hidden beneath layers of false belief about who you think you are. Every single time you think about yourself, you're standing at a decision point. You can identify as the limited human self with all its history, wounds, scars, and limitations. Or you can recognize the Christ, the divine presence that animates and sustains your life in every moment. This choice shapes everything that follows. When you face financial lack, for instance, you have two options. You can identify as someone who doesn't have enough, someone struggling and striving to make ends meet, reinforcing the consciousness of scarcity. Or you can recognize the Christ as infinite supply expressing through your life, not as wishful thinking or positive affirmations, but as recognition of truth. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist or using spiritual language to manipulate reality. It's about understanding the hidden truth behind appearances. The Christ consciousness is the recognition that you are not separate from the infinite, source of all provision, all wisdom, all creativity. When you live from this awareness, possibilities emerge that simply weren't available when you were operating from the limited sense of self. The impact of this shift is profound, because you're no longer trying to extract from the world what you think you lack. You're allowing what you already are to express through your life. This brings us to what might be the most challenging aspect of being born again, and it's what Wigglesworth called releasing personal sense. Personal sense is the deeply ingrained belief that you are a separate individual managing your own life through personal power and effort. It's the conviction that your success depends on how hard you work, how smart you are, how much you hustle and grind. This mindset has been reinforced by everything our culture teaches, but it keeps you trapped in exhausting cycles of striving and struggling. Being born again means dying to this personal sense and awakening to what Wigglesworth called God sense. This is the recognition that there isn't your life and God's life as separate things. There's only one life, one mind, one presence expressing as everything and everyone, including you. When you release personal sense, something remarkable happens in your day-to-day experience. You stop trying to force things to happen through sheer effort and willpower. Instead, you become a channel through which divine action flows naturally and effortlessly. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means your actions emerge from a completely different source. Instead of the anxious striving of the separate self trying to survive and succeed in a hostile world, your action flows from inner guidance and peace. You know what to do because you're connected to the source of all wisdom. You move with confidence because you trust the intelligence acting through you. The journey from personal sense to God sense is the journey from exhaustion to effortlessness, from struggle to flow. When you try to manage your life from personal sense, you're constantly carrying the weight of responsibility on your shoulders. You're the one who has to figure everything out, solve every problem, make everything happen. But when you live from God's sense, you recognize that the same intelligence that orchestrates the entire universe is managing your circumstances through you. This shift doesn't remove responsibility, but it transforms the quality of how you carry it. If you're ready to release personal sense and live from divine flow, write in the comments, "I surrender to the presence." Now let me be completely honest with you about something that nobody talks about enough in spiritual circles. Even when you understand everything I've shared so far, even when it all makes perfect intellectual sense, there's a massive obstacle that will confront you on this journey. The biggest challenge to being born again isn't misunderstanding the concepts or lacking the right techniques. It's the ego's desperate resistance to its own dissolution. The false self doesn't go quietly into the night. It fights for survival with everything it has. Here's what this looks like in real life. You might have a profound awakening experience where everything clicks into place and you see the truth clearly. You feel liberated, peaceful, connected to the divine presence. But then, days or weeks later, Old patterns suddenly return with surprising force. Anxiety floods back, self-doubt creeps in, fear grips you again. The temptation in these moments is to think you've failed, that your awakening wasn't real, that you're back at square one. But this is actually a critical juncture in your transformation. When these old patterns resurface, the worst thing you can do is fight them. Fighting them gives them power and reality. It reinforces the very identification you're trying to transcend. Instead, Smith Wigglesworth taught a different approach. Recognize these patterns as the death throes of a false identity. When anxiety appears, you don't say, "I'm anxious again," which re-identifies you with the anxious self. You say something radically different. Anxiety is appearing in consciousness, but I am the awareness observing anxiety, not the anxiety itself. This subtle shift in how you relate to thoughts and emotions changes everything. You're not denying their appearance, but you're refusing to be defined by them. This practice of disidentification is one of the most powerful tools you have in sustaining born-again consciousness. Every time you notice a negative pattern and choose awareness over identification, you weaken that pattern's grip on you. The false self loses its power, not because you defeated it in battle, but because you stopped feeding it with your attention and belief. But there's another challenge that emerges as you begin living from this awakened state, and it can feel quite isolating. When you start perceiving reality from born-again consciousness, you quickly realize that most people around you are still operating from the old paradigm. They don't understand your new perspective. They might think you've become strange, impractical, or that you're avoiding reality. The collective consciousness of the sleeping world constantly pulls you back toward identification with the false self and material appearances. This is where many people stumble on their journey. The pressure to conform, to fit in, to see things the way everyone else does becomes overwhelming. Without support and consistent practice, it's easy to slip back into the trance, to forget who you really are under the weight of the world's expectations and judgments. The solution isn't to isolate yourself completely or become self-righteous about your awakening. The solution is finding community, even if it's virtual, with others who understand this path. And most crucially, establishing a daily practice that anchors you in truth before the world's demands flood in. This is why starting each day by remembering who you are is so essential. Before you check your phone, before you engage with the news, before the world tells you who you should be and what you should worry about, you take those quiet moments to reconnect with your true nature. You remember that you are not the anxious mind, not the fearful personality, not the limited self. You are the eternal presence, temporarily experiencing life through this human form. Being born, again, isn't a one-time event that solves everything forever. It's a continuous choosing, a moment-by-moment decision about where you place your identity. Every single moment offers you this choice. Will you identify with the false self and all its drama, or will you rest in your true nature as divine consciousness? With practice, choosing truth becomes more natural, more automatic, until living from presence becomes your default setting, rather than something you have to work to maintain. If you're experiencing this resistance but choosing to stay committed to truth, write in the comments, "I'm choosing truth over comfort." So what does this born-again consciousness actually look like when it meets the messy reality of everyday life? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It's easy to feel spiritual during meditation or while reading inspiring teachings, but what happens when you're dealing with difficult people, frustrating work situations, or relationships that trigger all your old wounds? This is where the transformation becomes tangible and real. When you've been genuinely born again in consciousness, every situation becomes an opportunity for practice. Take relationships, for instance. Most people relate from a place of need, constantly seeking something from others: validation, security, completion, love. There's this underlying assumption that someone else can fill the emptiness inside, that the right person will finally make you whole. But when you're living from born-again consciousness, you relate from an entirely different foundation. You relate from fullness rather than lack. You're no longer seeking completion from another person because you've recognized you're already complete in God, already whole in your true nature. This doesn't mean you don't value relationships or that you become cold and detached. It means you bring something entirely different to every interaction. Instead of unconsciously asking, what can I get from this person? You're living from, what can I give from my fullness? The impact of this shift on your relationships is profound. When you stop needing people to be different, they naturally relax around you. When you stop demanding they meet your emotional requirements, they often become more generous. The entire dynamic transforms not because they changed, but because you're relating from a different consciousness. The same transformation happens with work and career. Most people approach their jobs from a mindset of survival and scarcity. They believe they must labor to earn money to survive, seeing work as a necessary burden, something they endure to pay bills. But when you bring born-again consciousness to your work, everything shifts. You recognize that your labor isn't fundamentally about earning money for survival. It's about serving as a channel for divine intelligence and creativity, to express through your unique gifts and abilities. Your work becomes sacred when you approach it this way. The tasks don't necessarily change, but the consciousness you bring to them transforms completely. What once felt burdensome becomes an interesting challenge. People you resented become souls you can serve. You're no longer working for a company or even for yourself in the limited sense. You're working for the presence, allowing it to express excellence and creativity through you. This shift often leads to better outcomes and new opportunities. But the real treasure is the inner transformation, from obligation to purpose, from drudgery to service. Now let me share the ultimate secret that Smith Wigglesworth revealed, and it might completely upend everything you think you know about spiritual transformation. Being born again is not your achievement. You cannot make yourself be born again through effort, discipline, or willpower. The very self that's trying to become born again is the false self that must die. Do you see the paradox here? The ego cannot transcend the ego. Personal effort cannot overcome the sense of being a separate person. This is why so many people struggle for years, trying harder and harder to become spiritual, to achieve enlightenment, to force themselves into a higher state of consciousness. They're using the problem to solve the problem. All you can actually do is surrender. Stop trying. Be still. Let the presence that has always been there, patiently waiting behind all your seeking and striving, reveal itself. In that stillness, when you finally stop doing and simply rest in being, something profound happens. The presence steps forward, and you recognize it as what has always been most intimately you, closer than breathing, nearer than your own thoughts. This recognition is being born again. It's not a future event you're working toward. It's a present reality you're finally allowing yourself to see. If this revelation is landing deeply in your heart right now, write in the comments, I'm ready to stop trying and start being. So here we are, at the end of this journey together, and if you've made it this far, I want you to know that's significant. Most people click away when spiritual truths start challenging their comfortable beliefs. But you stayed. You listened. You allowed these ideas to land in your consciousness. That tells me something about where you are on your path right now. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt that quiet recognition that these truths are speaking to your own awakening, I'd love for you to hit that like button. Not as some algorithm game, but as a way of saying, yes, this matters to me. It helps this message reach others who are ready to hear it. And honestly, it lets me know this content is serving you in a real way. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now would be a beautiful time to do that. I create content like this regularly. Deep dives into spiritual transformation, practical wisdom for living from awakened consciousness, real conversations about what it means to walk this path in the modern world. When you subscribe and turn on notifications, you're essentially saying, I'm committed to this journey of awakening, and I want to stay connected to teachings that support it. Leave a comment and let me know you made it to the end. Just write, this message found me at the right time. I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your readiness for transformation in a community of others on the same path. Before you go, there's another video right here that goes even deeper into living from this consciousness in practical ways. It complements everything we just explored together. Click and continue with me over there, because the journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning.